shit. There we go. Yeah, for anyone who's watching this like after the release, my link to the live stream screwed up, so I had to get a second one. Let's see if we can also throw one into the Discord to get some more people into the stream. Does it work? Okay, we got some people dropping in now. Yo, Golden Gunpowder. Hello, Pancakes. I'm glad to see the link was actually working. Because I thought it didn't work at once. Magda says hi. Hello, Magda. How are you doing? Tyler said hello, good sir. Hello, Tyler. How are you doing? I think you were mentioned in the video, if I remember correctly. Garza Vlog said hello. Hello, Garza. I think you told me last time to pronounce your name as Garza, but I don't remember correctly. You need to stop having an X in your name. Versing said hello. How are you today, my friend? I'm very good, thank you. How are you doing? Creative Fancy said Barry Clifford found a spoon in Madagascar once and proclaimed it to be kids because always the spoons. Why the spoons? Yeah, spoons are pretty good. It's probably one of the better eating implements. You can do a lot with a spoon. Like you can cut a banana with a spoon. That is pretty impressive. What was the spoon made of? Was it like pewter or was it silver or something? Matt McLean said Tyler getting a shot at this week. Yeah, Tyler helped me with some of the research to the video, and I also got to read Tyler's paper before it's released, because I got that privilege, you know. Levi Mark said, "Cheers from Atlanta, GA. Amazing stuff on your channel. Keep on the good work." Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. Magda said, "I'm good, thanks." I'm glad to hear you're doing fine. Versing also said, "Fine, thanks." That's great. Pancake said, "Spoon is superior due to the variety of uses. Fork is a specialist utensil." Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, the spoon is a bit more limited, but I would argue that a spoon is better for mashing potatoes. Piotr said, "Spoon check." There we go. Yeah, get your spoons out. Spoons out for Anne Bonny. Levi Mark said, "Love the outfit." Oh, thank you very much. Hard to hurt yourself on a moving ship with a spoon. Yeah, that's actually a very good point. You kind of want to avoid implements like that on a shipboard environment. I'm thinking if you could use like, because in parts of the Caribbean they have like they load the cannons with forks, right? I wonder if you could. I mean, you could load a cannon with spoons, but I'm kind of questioning how effective it would be. Like, I mean, sure, if the spoon hits someone there, it probably hurts. But I guess a fork would be a bit more effective. Yeah, you pronounced it all right. All right, I'll trust you. I'll trust you. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this week's video. There will not be a release next week. There will be a release on the Baltic Empire channel, but there's going to be, since it's an extra week in December, there's going to be 4 releases next month. So you'll have to stay tuned. I might also change the um, live stream releases in the second month. I'm probably gonna do live streams after the premieres because I'm kind of changing how the premieres work in the next month. Mark Bouquet asked, how common were rifled arquebuses? That's a very interesting question. So arquebuses are one of the earlier types of firearms. The earliest type of firearm was the handgun, or well, it's technically it was the fire lance. The fire lances and the handgun are sort of the same thing. It's like a short metal tube which is mounted on a pole, and you fire it by sticking like a hot match or a rod into it. And the arquebus actually it's the closest to what we would consider a modern firearm. So it actually had like a rifle stock added to it, I guess you could call it. And these guns were pretty rudimentary, and uh, rifling, of course, which are like the cut grooves inside of a gun barrel, is something we heavily associated with guns today. If you also seen the James Bond intro, like you can see the rifling inside of his pistol or whatever. Um, and rifling is actually quite old. It's almost as old as uh, firearms with stocks added to them. Like they date rifling seems to date back to the 1500s, and rifling it appears mostly on firearms owned by the aristocracy. I visited the royal. It's called like the Royal Armory in Stockholm in Sweden, where where they have pistols that belong to Swedish kings from the 16th and 17th century, and a lot of these pistols were actually rifled, and they also had front and rear sights. And most pistols from the period, even in the 18th century, didn't even have front sights, whereas muskets had front sights. And front and rear sights helps you aim a firearm better. Uh, I kind of went a bit far from your original question on rifled arquebuses, but yeah, rifled arquebuses. Rifling was quite hard to make before the advent of industrial drilling in the 19th century. Um, so you had to cut it. You had to cut it manually. I'm not entirely sure how it was done, but it was definitely harder. So it was more expensive and less common. Uh, and rifled arquebuses, they were used both for hunting, but also by specialists in armed forces. If I remember correctly from Swedish documents from the 16th century, there was like a ratio of like 1 to 6, 1 to 4, something like that, rifled to smoothbore firearms in the army. Um, so they were quite common. I'm not sure how they were used tactically, if they had like specialists, but it should also be common that like kind of like sharpshooters, skirmishers, where it was kind of a default mode for matchlocks in a way. Like matchlock musketeers wouldn't stand in the they usually wouldn't stand in the tight line formations usually associated with flintlocks and line infantry in the 18th century, because for a matchlock you risk setting your comrades' powder charges on fire and exploding. So to sum up your question, rifled arquebuses existed. They were quite rare. I'm not sure how common they were in the English and French and Spanish world. They seem to have been quite popular in Germany and Scandinavia. Stevie J also said rifling made it more difficult to load down the barrel, though. Yeah, it definitely did. It made it slower, but uh, during the 16th and the 17th century, speedy reloading wasn't really a huge issue. Like they didn't stress it. Like military doctrine seems to have favored accuracy. So even just regular musketeers were um, they were told to put more aim into their shots and to focus on accuracy. So I don't think the slower reload time would have been much of an issue. And it's more interesting to it would be more interesting to read into the tactical application of these early rifled firearms. And also, rifled firearms kind of disappeared in the 17th century. They mostly became a thing used by certain hunters. Um, and also, French dragoons were actually equipped with rifled carbines. And since since dragoons were also assigned to guarding governors and palace duty in France in the 17th century, this also means that colonial guards in French colonies were equipped with rifled carbines, even if they didn't have horses. So I have one of my shorts which talks about the Knights of Malta in the Caribbean. And the Knights of Malta, they would have these the French musketeer tabards with the Maltese cross on it, and they would have these rifled carbines. So you have these like neo crusaders in the Caribbean equipped with rifled carbines in the 1600s in the Buccaneer age, which is pretty cool. So yeah, early rifled firearms, it's very interesting. I would love to research it more on the Baltic Empire channel. It doesn't seem like pirates used rifled firearms much at all, and they didn't. It doesn't really seem like they needed it either. They were already pretty good shots, and they also used scattering ammunition, which increased the hit ratio, the chance to hit. Sorry if I forgot anyone else's questions. I went on a firearms tangent. Some dude 64 said, "Made a live stream. Hope you're doing well, Golden Gunpowder." Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you very much. I hope you're doing well as well. Stevie J said, "Is this a pirate stream? Let's go." Yeah, let's go. It's a pirate stream, definitely. It's always a pirate stream. Versing said, "This time I wrote down my questions." Yeah, well, just feel free to post them, and I'll get to them eventually. HB Lovecraft said, "Best early firearm." I also see that you posted your question twice. I'm gonna get through like all of the questions, so I'm gonna get to it eventually. So you don't need to post it twice. Best early firearm. It depends on how you define early. Like, do you define like in the oh, you don't need to apologize either. I'm just like clarifying so you don't like worry about it. I'll get to it eventually, so don't worry. It depends on how you define like early firearms. If you define like the when the firearms were first invented in like the Middle Ages or like the late Middle Ages, or if you mean the 1500s or the pirate age in the 17th century, or just any firearm before the Industrial Revolution and the advent of the percussion cap. And it also depends on what you want to use your firearm for. Because if you want long range accuracy, then of course, like some sort of rifled black powder firearm would have been basically any firearm made before rifling was common. Yeah, I mean, I think I think probably the best one would either to be a Buccaneer gun, or possibly like a rifled Buccaneer gun. The thing with like the thing with rifles is rifles are a bit misunderstood. Like, especially if you look at the American Civil War, a lot of people think that like, yeah, the casualties in the American Civil War, it was because they were issued with rifled muskets, which suddenly made everyone hit all of their shots. Most of the casualties were due to artillery, and also the deadliness of muskets came from them using multiple projectiles, which also buccaneers did, and soldiers in the 18th century used multiple projectiles as well because it was so effective. And this is why the buccaneers were so effective with their muskets, of course. So I'm not sure if you're looking at early firearms, if rifling is actually very necessary, because rifling also, if you have rifling, it gives you accuracy at longer range, but you also need to know how to shoot at longer range. And so you need to elevate your firearm at the correct angle, and you also need to take the wind into account, because the wind will affect the where your bullet goes. So it might be preferable to have like a long barreled firearm, a buccaneer gun, buccaneer musket, and then load it with multiple projectiles. Uh, Again, it's like it's pure speculation. Let's see here. I'm scrolling up a bit. Electric Eye 1984 by Sam says, "Good day. Good day to you too. Hope you're doing well." Ricardo T said, "Hello all. So glad I found your channel, sir. Keep up the amazing work. More knowledge than I got in school." Yeah, well, not a lot of schools that talk about piracy. Though I think American schools should probably talk more about piracy because the 1600s seems to be left out of American schools quite a lot, which is a shame because it's very quite relevant. You can see traces of the American Revolution beginning in the 1690s with the Navigation Acts. So restrictions placed on trade, like trade being restricted to only with the English, for example. And this was partly caused by, I mean, it was caused by smuggling, and smuggling and piracy were very interconnected. And oftentimes, smuggling and piracy were regarded as the same thing. Crew of the Fancy said, "Living in Pennsylvania, our rifle tradition comes from the Germans. Fowlers and Buchan guns were more common among the English in the area until around the mid 1700s." Yeah, the Germans had like a long history of rifled firearms. They were probably the ones who invented rifled firearms, and of course, they also have like famous rifles like the Jaeger rifle. I just said rifle there in like a super German accent. I think they call it Gewehr. I'm not actually sure if there's also like Stutzer, which I think Stutzer refers specifically to rifled firearms. Electric Eye 1984 by Sam said, "Of the subject before I forgot to ask, I heard there were some Japanese quote unquote pirates controlling waterways hundreds of years back. Is there any truth to this?" Yeah, there were Asian pirates active in Asia during, I mean, pretty much all pre-industrial times, and many of them were Japanese, but they were usually quite, they were usually like mixed ethnicities, like Chinese, Korean, uh, the different islanders like Malaysia and stuff. Um, Andrew Ryan said, "Golden Gunpowder, nice to hear you live again. Hope everyone is well. I hope you're doing well, good as well, Ryan. Nice to see you again as well." Monkstry said, "Are there any accounts of buccaneers deploying pikemen or otherwise units with polearms, specifically to repel Spanish cavalry?" Very interesting question. Now, the pike was, of course, part of military doctrine pretty much before the bayonet really took off. The pike seems to have been used quite far into the 1700s, or at least into the War of Spanish Succession, at least. Now, the problem with the pike is, of course, it's very long, it's quite heavy, and it can only be applied in pretty much set battles when you can deploy in pike formations. And the problem is like these set battles where you have like these very cinematic pieces where you have like giant formations squaring off and like cavalry charges and everything, they were quite rare. Most fighting in most wars were pretty much skirmishes. It was plundering. It was just guys on patrol encountering each other and fighting. And in these scenarios, the pike is quite useless almost. Not to mention that in a daily life of a soldier, you're not fighting. You're doing stuff like you're marching. You do more marching. You set up camp. You gather supplies. You commit war crimes on civilians. um, and you have to carry your pike with you all the time. So you see a lot of evidence of, or even I think there's even like written descriptions of pikemen just cutting their pikes down because they were too long and unwieldy. And now imagine you're a buccaneer at sea, and you would have to take a pike with you, a super long pike. And now, if you're a buccaneer, you do a lot of fighting on land, but you also do a lot of fighting at sea. And if you're at sea, the pike, can't really use it for much because buccaneers, when they fought at sea, they would fire their muskets until the enemy surrendered, and they would sometimes board the enemy, but oftentimes it wasn't necessary. Um, there are quite a few accounts of buccaneers engaging cavalry, of course, in on land, both in skirmishes and set battles. For example, there is the battle of one of Henry Morgan's battles. I don't. It was on Cuba. I always forget the name of the city. It was one of his first battles. When he was engaged by cavalry, he deployed his men in semicircular formations, so they could fire in at multiple angles at the cavalry, and this prevented the. This seems to have been quite effective. This tactic was recycled in 1681 at Arica in Peru. Well, Arica is actually part of Chile, and Peru and Chile are kind of having a dispute about it today, but back then it was part of the Viceroyalty of Peru. And the Buccaneers were retreating from the city of Arica after they really messed up, let's just say. And they decided to retreat, and they were chased by cavalry. And when the cavalry came at them, they got themselves into a circular formation. So not a semicircular formation like Morgan, but a fully circular formation, like a ring. And they had the healthy musketeers out in the circle, and they had the wounded in the center of the circle, protected by the ring itself. And the circle was moving; it was slowly moving down towards the beach, back towards the boats. And when the cavalry came at them, they just kept firing at it. Possibly the guys in the center, like the wounded guys, they could have loaded muskets and passed them around, so you could have kept up a continuous fire upon the cavalry. The cavalry themselves were armed with carbines, and apparently these carbines actually were discovered as having longer range than the buccaneers' muskets, which is very interesting. So maybe they were equipped with the rifled carbines also used by French cavalry. Who knows? It's basically just mentioned that they had the longer range, but not so much more is described about it. And then, of course, there are descriptions of buccaneers engaging cavalry in skirmishes on essentially being ambushed by 1 or 3 or 10 small units of Spanish cavalry, and they would shoot them with their muskets. They wouldn't carry pikes with them into the jungle. So you asked a kind of short question. I gave a very long answer. The purpose of the answer was essentially to provide why pikes were kind of unwieldy, and also why it seems like the Buccaneers had alternatives to dealing with Spanish cavalry. Of course, there are quite a lot of illustrations from the period of Buccaneers having polearms and pikes, but these illustrations were made by European artists, and they were based on armies of the time. They weren't based on the Caribbean Buccaneers, because the Buccaneers were essentially seen as a sort of rogue military in a way. Now, halberds and pikes were used by the various corsairing groups, so the Sea Dogs, the Huguenots, and the Dutch Sea Beggars in the 1500s and the early 1600s. But it seems halberds at sea were kind of phased out of popularity sometime in the early 1600s. I hope that answered the question. Of course, there were boarding pikes, but I'm not sure how popular boarding pikes were with buccaneers. They also had plug bayonets. A plug bayonet is it's essentially a knife with a very thin handle, thin enough so you can plug it into the muzzle of your musket, essentially turning it into a spear. But it also means this bayonet is very hard to remove, so it means you cannot shoot it until you can get out of combat and remove it, probably with like thongs or something, tongs or whatever. And of course, the plug bayonet was in the early 1700s replaced by the socket bayonet. The socket bayonet has, instead of plugging it into the muzzle, it has like a ring on it. So you fit it over the muzzle, over the barrel of the gun, which means you can stabby and shooty at the same time. Very efficient. Again, very, very long postscript answer. I hope it answered your question. Now that I say there's a lot of more questions there, so let's see if I can move on. Andrew Ryan made some comments on the Waco pirates, which yeah, they were essentially the ones I was talking about. Uh, Mark Bouquet asked, "Have you ever done a video about Francois Lolonais? Do you ever intend to do one? I think he was an interesting and scary character." Uh, so Francois is he's quite popular. I don't think there's actually too much information about him. Most of the information comes from Exquemelin's book, and there's also quite a lot of videos about him already out on YouTube. So it's I wouldn't really be able to contribute much new information to him about him. So maybe I will cover him due to how popular he is, but I mean personally, I prefer to focus on some lesser known pirates when it comes to biographies. Kit Simmons said most fighting back then happened at very close range, so rifles not really much advantage apart from sniping. Um, yeah, pretty much. I mean, it also depends on how you define like close range, but that's another debate. Monkstry asked, ever hear of any instances where 18th century marooners interact with Native Americans? Not at the top of my mind, no. Tyler asked, so how much has your opinion of the female pirates changed now that you've done all the videos? Hasn't really changed. I don't really care much. Andrew Ryan said, YouTube sent me to 00 and I thought the stream just started. Sad. Well, welcome back. Versing said, I was just watching your video about Henry Morgan, but I was wondering, how did Morgan launch a fake attack on land to escape from the Spanish on Lake Maracaibo with more wooden pirates? It's a while since I'd done the video and since I read about Morgan. If I remember correctly, he took one of the captured Spanish ships or one of his own ships and then made it into a fire ship and then disguised it as an actual ship by having dummies on board. So he fitted it out with fake cannons and dummies that had like hats on them and stuff, so it looked from afar like an actual ship. And then he sent it at the Spanish and blew the ship up, and it damaged the Spanish fleet. And then he sent in his regular ships and just gave him the good old tootsie wootsie or whatever. He gave him a spanking. And yeah, it was quite devastating for the Spanish pirate hunting fleet, the Armada de Barlavento. They didn't really recover from it. So yeah, I think that's pretty much how it happened, yeah. On the topic, Monkster said, on the topic of 17th century history in American education, my colonial America class in college placed a surprising amount of focus on King Philip's War, which is heavily underrated. Yeah, that's quite interesting. King Philip's War is quite interesting. I don't have time to get into it, and I'm far from a specialist on it. I don't know much about it. But so I suggest everyone watching, if you're interested, will in colonial history will look into it. But basically, the King Philip was a very powerful Native American chief. I don't remember which tribe. And he pretty much was close to destroying the English colonies. He was very successful, and this was like the closest the colonies came to being destroyed. So it was very much a war for the colony's existence. Snake Pliskin asked, have you read Albion's Seed? I have not. Sneaky Simeon asked, wasn't Lawrence de Graaf married to a lady who dabbled in piracy, or was just part of a crew? If I remember correctly, it seems to be a myth that she was part of a crew or that she was a pirate herself. Now she seems to have been quite hot-tempered and quite fierce, but I don't think she was an actual pirate. And Monkster said, there's no source corroborating the Graaf's wife ever joined on any filibustering expeditions. Well, there we go. Panzer's Ashes said, how young could a sailor get? Very interesting question. So, of course, aboard ships, you would have cabin boys, and they would essentially be like servants to the officers, and they would light their pipes, serve them food and stuff. Pirates would also have cabin boys. But if pirates had cabin boys, they often like served the entire crew. And when the cabin boys grew up, like became entered their teens, they would usually get like delegated to regular sailing duties. So usually they would become topmast men, and topmast men they're relegated to the topmasts, so the top of the masts. For I mean, you need to climb very far, so you need to have young and spry limbs for climbing that high up. Um, so how young could a sailor get? If you're a cabin boy, I think you became it around like maybe 10 or 12. I'm not entirely sure, but you can probably look it up quite easily. Sneaky Simeon asked, okay, a little artistic license. Yeah, a little bit. We do a little artistic license, many such cases. Um, Monkster said she stayed at Pedigua, managing their estate, and likely was with the Boucanier. Boucanier wives continued their hunting trade while the husbands were gone away cruising against enemies of France. Yeah, pretty much. Versing said, okay, he has to go. Goodbye. Sadly, I was unable to say goodbye in time. Uh, let's see, I'm trying to catch up there. Oh man, there's a lot of comments and questions here. Andrew Ryan said, interesting, thanks for the insight, Golden Gunpowder. Been trying to flesh out a fantasy world of mine, where piracy and pike and shot managed to live side by side with one another into the early industrial age. Sounds quite interesting. Uh, I would suggest you look into, you look into like the Wild West and the history surrounding that, because there's a lot of like similarities in the filibusters, for example, and pirates. The filibusters were quite similar to the Buccaneers in a way, but they were more politically motivated than the Buccaneers. I mean, the Buccaneers were more religiously motivated if you go into ideologies, but yeah. Uh, Artemis Entity said, didn't the Spanish use a herd of cattle in a battle in Panama? Yeah, they did. They deployed like a herd of cattle to break up Morgan's formations when he attacked Panama in 1671. It didn't work out because the cows were just scared by the gunfire and they just dispersed. And it's also been some have also said that since a lot of the Buccaneers participant were like hunters who were experienced in hunting wild cattle, they just like they knew how to handle cattle and they were used to stampedes. Sneaky Simeon said, would a swivel gun slash petrero or any light gun ever been used in any Buccaneer land actions? Doesn't seem like it. They were quite heavy, and those sorts of light pieces were described in the period as only being mounted on ships. But I think like if for Andrew Ryan or someone who's doing a fantasy, I think it's pretty funny if you would have like a portable swivel gun as like a light machine gun or something. You just have like a big guy carrying it. Andrew Ryan said, I wouldn't discount pikes or spears being a weapon from antiquity, as apparently they were used as an alternative by the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. Yeah, of course, pikes were definitely used, and they were used at sea as well, boarding pikes, but they just weren't a popular pirate weapon. Boarding pikes seem to have very good for defending ships, primarily. And of course, buccaneers were primarily attacking ships. Pancake said, fun fact, Buccaneers appear in The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Interesting. Artemis Entity said, I'm not sure about pirates, but many American forts in the 18th century had swivel guns. Yeah, of course, you would also mount swivel guns on fortifications and stuff. Armored Goat said, a lot of pirate movies from the early 20th century depict Spaniards and Spanish soldiers as heavily armored conquistadors with rapiers and feathered helmets. Just how accurate is this depiction? Well, if they're supposed to be depicted as conquistadors, it's not very accurate because the conquistadors did not really wear Morayan helmets. The sort of curved Morayan helmets which we associate with conquistadors didn't really appear until the late 1500s, which was after most of the conquistas. And the conquistadors weren't really heavily armored either. They primarily wore, if you look at like the most contemporary pictures, they are usually seen in just regular clothes. And also Cortez's expedition, when he left Havana, his soldiers were primarily, or well, his conquistadors, they were primarily armed with cotton gambeson, which was actually Mayan and Native American in design. In terms of helmets, they used like cabasets and other sort of like late medieval helmets. And if you're asking about how Spanish soldiers looked in the 1600s, uh, heavy armor doesn't seem to have been very favored. They used armor and helmets when fighting against Native Americans because they primarily had arrows. But when fighting pirates, and it also seems like they used cotton armor still, but when fighting pirates, they seem to have just worn clothes, just regular clothes. Uh, Hobnoblin asked, "What musket makers were there? Was there any arms companies, or just made?" All right, so arm producers in the period. Yeah, there were quite a lot of like gun makers in the period. I don't remember the names, but in France, the Buccaneer guns, some of the most reputed makers of Buccaneer guns, were located in Nantes, for example. And you would also have, of course, royal arms productions like Toul in France, and of course the Tower of London, the Royal Armory, would also produce its own firearms. But there were, of course, like independent gun makers and gunsmiths. Um, I would have to look this up to know it specifically, but yeah, there were like families and like arms companies who produced reputed firearms, and some were quite well reputed. Tyler said, "Actually, I can answer the maroon and native question. Nicholas Laws, governor of Jamaica, hired a chief from a native tribe named King Jeremy to hunt down maroons in the 1720s." I think by marooners he meant the. Actually, I don't remember the. I think Monkstree asked about the marooners, as in the pirates from the early 18th century who often called themselves marooners because they engaged in marooning a lot. Uh, And speaking about interaction with Native Americans, of course, it seems more common that they interacted with the natives of Madagascar, which isn't America, of course, but is the closest I can remember. Uh, let's see, I'm scrolling in the chat right now too. Sneaky Simeon said, "I know a lot later on. There's documentation of Woodes Rogers using two guns on land. Yeah, he used carriage cannons. So these seem to have been the not swivel guns, but mounted artillery, which you can move off their sea carriage and onto a land carriage, which has bigger wheels. They weren't effective at all, though. I think they got stuck in mud and stuff. So there's a reason they weren't used by pirates and privateers and such. I think cohorn mortars could have been quite effective on land because cohorn mortars were quite light. They could be carried by a small team, and they were used on a few pirate ships, including Rogers' privateer ship. Simba said, "I know you like paired firearms a lot, and you've talked about them quite a bit. How much can you yeah, a bit. How much can you say about the other weapons, swords, hatchets? Movies tend to focus on unrealistic duels a lot. I mean, what can I say about other weapons? It's a broad question. You'll have to be more specific." King Edward the Turbulent Neil said, "Hello, fellow pirates. Hello, King Edward." Stevie J asked, "Did pirates ever have chaplains on board? Priests for military units?" Yeah, there are descriptions of pirates both seeking chaplains, like Bartholomew Roberts. He asked the priest to come aboard his ship and hold mass, and the priest said, "No thanks." And Roberts was like, "Okay." There was also this French flibustier called Captain Daniel, and he had a priest called Labat. Labat wrote a book about it aboard his ship, and I think Daniel had another priest as well. And the priest held mass, and if someone disturbed the mass, then Captain Daniel shot them. He seems to have been really pious. So yeah, a lot of pirates were religious, and they had chaplains aboard their ships. Mark Bouquet asked, "I've read a book in French from the 17th century called History of the Antilles, describing many cases of black or white maroon slaves joining the natives, most of the times being peacefully welcomed." Yeah, it happened that especially escaped African slaves would join native communities, but often quite there would often arise these like racial conflicts between Native Americans and Africans, like the coexistence. It's kind of easy to imagine, like, oh yeah, these like oppressed races, they would like always like ally with each other. But Labatt wrote about it like that they would get mad at each other and would like fight over petty stuff. And a lot of Native Americans were racist as well. Andrew Ryan said, "Don't forget Powder Monkey's golden gunpowder. I believe there were boys that helped the gun crews in reloading." Yeah, pretty much. They would have been the same as the topmast boys and cabin boys, pretty much. Snake Plissken said, "Albion Seed is one of the best books on early America, and the 4 groups from Britain who sell there: Puritans, Cavaliers, Quakers, Ulster Scots, etc." It sounds very interesting. I might add it to my reading list if I have the ability, because my reading list is pretty long. Okay, I'm gonna try to focus on questions, but there's a lot of interesting comments. But I'm gonna try to focus on questions. Hobnoblin asked, "Do you know any musket/gun models Buccaneers would use?" Um, yeah, they primarily use the. I mean, model is kind of hard to describe, since like uh, the firearms in the period were kind of designed irregularly, and no musket was entirely the same since all of them were designed by hand. But Buccaneers preferred, well, the musket which was considered the best for sea service was an incredibly long-barreled firearm called a Buccaneer gun, for a reason, because the Buccaneers liked it. And originally, the long barrel seems to have been designed for hunting. There were also a kind of hunting firearm called Fowler, which Fowlers had a smaller barrel, or well, a smaller caliber, and they were meant for fowling, for hunting birds. And of course, the Buccaneer gun, the hunting musket, originally had a long barrel, and it was supposed to hunt larger game like boars and I don't know, stuff like that. Deer, I guess. I was gonna say moose, but you don't really have any moose in the Caribbean. um, and the long barrel was said to improve accuracy. It improves muzzle velocity, which is like the speed which the bullet travels, and it makes it easier to hit your target. And they preferred this firearm. Basically, that was like the musket they preferred, and it due to the accuracy. But they also loaded them with multiple projectiles to improve the hit ratio. Tyler asked, "Here's a question. Since Anne Bonny was a powder monkey, does this imply she might have been on the smaller side since powder monkeys were usually children, or no?" Eh, I don't think you like. I don't think you need to be small to be a powder monkey. I think anyone could have done it. It's like, yeah, this seems like something too speculative for me, at least for now. I mean, without like definite information, you can like rant on about and speculate about these things like kind of indefinitely, and I don't have time for it right now. Mark Bouquet asked, "How far could you sail using piraguas?" It's a very interesting question. Now, of course, there is evidence of different tribal islanders, especially in the Pacific Ocean, using similar sort of vessels to go very far distances. In the Caribbean, of course, the piragua was invented by the Carib Indians who went from the South American mainland into the Caribbean using piraguas and canoes and stuff, and being quite effective. And there's also this instance of Henry Pittman and his guys escaping in, I don't think it was a piragua, I think it was like a rowboat, and they went quite far enough. But so And also, if you look at Europe during the Stone Age and that sort of period, you could also go quite far using dugout canoes. But the thing should also be remembered is like they would primarily travel along coastlines, and it would get very risky to go out on the open sea with these boats. So it mostly seems like when you would go out to the open sea, it also seems like you did like island hopping, pretty much like go from island to island and then try to stick to the coast, so you don't get overturned by a wave or a storm. Um, I've never sailed a piragua, and I probably wouldn't take it out on the open ocean either. Commander Bell asked, "Did pirates make their own ammo and powder?" Gunpowder, no. It's a bit too complicated for them to make their own gunpowder, so they would buy or steal it. But yeah, they would make their own ammo, and pretty much all soldiers in the period would make their own ammo. You would pretty much get issued leads of pig, so like little pig lead bars, and then you would melt them over a campfire. And muskets and firearms would usually be sold together with a toolkit, and the toolkit would include stuff to clean the firearm, but also bullet molds. And bullet molds, of course, where you would pour the molten lead into it, and then you would mold it into bullets, and then you would nip off the little excess lead and melt it again. And they would make bullets, of course, just round bullets. They would also make pellets or swan shot, and they could make slugs, which are essentially bars, but slugs weren't as common as bullets. And they're also like different shapes of bullets, basically. So yeah, they would not make their own gunpowder, but they would make their own ammo, and they would also make their own paper cartridges, which is essentially it's just a little tube of powder which is filled with gunpowder and a bullet, which makes the reloading faster. Stevie J asked, if they interacted with the people of Madagascar, I wonder if they ever took lemurs as pets. Yeah, it's like the prequel to those Madagascar movies. I wonder if Piotr is still in the chat. It would be kind of funny, Piotr, if your last name is Kowalski. Then I'm never gonna stop harassing you about it. Pancakes asked, how could you expect a privateer to be armed in the 1680s to 90s? We'll just assume sloop 70 ton. How many true great guns or cannon? How many small arms per man? 3 to 5 muskets a man. So a sloop of that size could have like something between like 4 to 10 cannon. As for the muskets, every privateer was expected to acquire his own firearms. So he would buy, pretty much the standard would be for every man to buy his own musket and then have a case of pistols, which is 2 pistols, and then sometimes a cutlass, but often a musket would suffice. Snake Plissken asked, were pirates able horsemen? What percentage of pirates would have been able to ride horses with some proficiency? Asking for like specific percentages on something as poorly documented as pirates is pretty much impossible to determine. There were some pirates have been tracked with riding equipment in their possession, and there was also a buccaneer commander in the 1600s called Chevalier Gramont, who would, when he captured Spanish cities, he would take Spanish horses from the stables and organize buccaneer cavalry units. Usually they would be quite small, like 50 men or something, and then they would go out into the countryside surrounding the city to search for stragglers, to plunder nearby houses, farms, and stuff like that. But I think Gramont was like the only one who was described doing it, so it doesn't seem to have been very common. So knowing how many of them knew how to ride horses, it's like impossible to know. It was a useful skill to have in the period, but if you spent most of your life at sea or in the vicinity or in urban cities, probably not. Pancakes asked, also did ships actually carry their guns symmetrically, as in a larboard gun being directly abeam from its counterpart, the starboard gun, or were they unequal on each side? I think they were equal on each side. It probably would have been better for balance, but I'm not sure. That's a niche question. Andrew Ryan asked, if you don't mind me mentioning my story again, I wrote how sailors had rifles, hatchets, naval axes. I'm curious how you differentiate between hatchets and naval axes, but would owning a rapier be semi-realistic while on board a ship? So Spanish sailors in the period, they did use rapiers, but they were, at least some did, especially if they were gentlemen. But they were often ridiculed by buccaneers for using rapiers because the rapier was regarded as useless if you're in boarding combat. The rapier was primarily a dueling weapon. Uh, Armies of the time, soldiers in the period often used small swords, and small swords are they're pretty much rapiers, but they have like I think the blade is like slightly shorter. Um, the thing is, like when designing a fantasy setting, it's easy to do stuff which is like the most optimal thing, but often if you look at history, people do things which are not optimal. They do stupid things, like the Spanish who have rapiers to repel a boarding party. If you want to repel a boarding party, it would probably have been better to use pikes, so short spears, essentially. Uh, Artemis Entity said, LMAO, this is a really stupid question. There are no stupid questions. But is there any recorded history of medieval bombards being used in the golden age of golden era of piracy? Um, so basically, older cannons would usually be melted down and recast into new models. Uh, Same for bombards. Now, bombards were mounted on ships in the 1500s, especially on galleys, but they were primarily used for siege warfare, so for attacking coastal settlements, and they would pretty much they wouldn't be too efficient in a fight at sea where a lighter vessel could just move in or and board you or outmaneuver you and then gun you down with guns which were lighter but also faster to load and also more of them, so they could kill your crew. Um, and pirate guns, like the guns mounted aboard their ships, they were way lighter than medieval bombards, um, but they would have been melted down. Uh, C asked, I require further elaboration on the spoon section. Oh, you shall get it. So basically, in the video on Anne Bonny, I talk about her backstory in the book A General History of the Pirates, where it said that, okay, I can't be bothered to like repeat the story because it's so stupid and convoluted and melodramatic. But basically, Anne Bonny was conceived, allegedly conceived, thanks to spoons. It's ridiculous. So yeah, you'll have to go to the video because I can't be bothered to repeat it. I'm sorry. Andrew Ryan said, maybe you should write a book of your findings one day, Golden Gunpowder. I'm not gonna do it. There are like people who will do that stuff way better than me. Simba said, okay, specific. I was interested in what those kinds of fights were actually like. Did they really just hack with something sharp and heavy and hope for the best, or did they have documented tactics? Um, okay, some people said they had some. Okay, some people say they have audio issues. I didn't see it. Okay, I don't see any more comments, so I presume the audio is good again. Well, as we know, spoons do cause pregnancy. uh, yeah. I'm gonna see if I can scroll up here to the question. I wanted to scroll down for a bit. Jesus Christ, gosh, Christ, like the scrolling. There we go. It's so sensitive. Like it's so tiny. It's so hard to click on it. Uh, well, I hope the audio is good again. I'm kind of I can't leaking. I'm sorry. I'm being immature. Um, Oh yeah, so Simba asked about the tactics. So it seems like for the most part, boarding tactics were just like tight formations on a pretty small ship, just going at it with cutlasses and pistols at very close range. Um, I remember some historians saying that like privateers had more time dedicated to training their men in sword fighting. And there are also eyewitness descriptions of at least one pirate who whose men would train on the ship at fencing. So maybe some pirates did have more training in sword fighting, but for the regular sailor and even navy men, it doesn't seem like they had much training in sword fighting until the late 18th century and early 19th century. I would rather die than have a Kowalski last name, Piotr said. uh, Tyler asked, okay, I gotta ask, you say Queen Anne pistol a lot. What distinguishes a Queen Anne pistol from a normal flintlock? Okay, so if I use my pistol as a reference, this is a normal flintlock pistol. You can see it has a stock, the barrel attached to it, and then you have the ramrod here. Now the Queen Anne pistol, it omits the stock and the ramrod, and instead, and also this also allows you to unscrew the barrel. So the barrel is like screwed onto the stock pretty much. So you can unscrew it to reload it. Uh, by omitting the stock, and Queen Anne pistols also had a shorter barrel, it becomes smaller and easier to keep on your person. And Queen Anne pistols they would evolve into the pocket pistols and the muff pistols, which you could keep inside your sleeve or like a pocket. Um, the benefits of the Queen Anne pistols is, of course, you could aside from them being smaller, pirates would often keep them in pockets, as a matter of fact. But the benefits of them being like screwable, it's not because it like you wouldn't like unscrew and reload them in combat because it's still like very unwieldy. It would make them easier to clean, however. That is like the most important part. Cleaning one of these, like essentially what you do is like you pour hot water in and out of the barrel and then pour it out. And I guess with a Queen Anne pistol, you could unscrew the barrel and then you could like scrub inside of it much easier. So cleaning becomes easier essentially. And it's so basically a Queen Anne pistol. It has a screwable. It emits the stock. You screw the barrel on and off to reload it and to clean it. It's smaller and you can keep it in like a pocket more easily. Whereas, I mean, a regular pistol, it's not unwieldy, but it's a Queen Anne is smaller. Uh, Hopefully, I can acquire a Queen Anne pistol of some sort one day. I know a few of her that are being sold, or well, similar models, but they're like from the late 1700s. And I'm not gonna buy any more firearms for a while. I could afford it, but I can also afford other things, you know. Mark Bouquet asked, "How would buccaneers light their arquebus matches in the Caribbean on boats or islands? Did they have lighters like wheelock lighters?" So buccaneers didn't really use matchlocks; they preferred flintlocks by far, and they adapted flintlocks very early. Uh, Regarding those who used matchlocks, I'm not. They probably had some. They might have used like a flint and steel, and they would probably light a match and then they would like pass it around. But you also had these like wheelock lighters, as you said, and also just flintlock lighters. And of course, pirates would light matches for other reasons. They would use it for grenades. So when you attack a city, for example, you would have a bunch of guys with grenades, and they would have slow matches tied around the wrist, which would be burning, or they would have like essentially little sensors. So like essentially a round metal container with holes in it and a burning match inside of it kept dangling. So they would need stuff to light those matches, and I would presume they just used like flint and steel or some dedicated lighter. Andrew Ryan said, "I thought naval axes were two-handed weapons, and hatchets are smaller one-handed weapons. Maybe I'm wrong." Uh, no, it's true. Um, they're usually called boarding axes. They might be called naval axes. I usually hear boarding axes. I also hear pole axes quite a lot because they're mounted on a pole. Um, I can't remember the benefits though. Okay, yeah, you're talking about the Queen Anne pistols. Yeah, people are talking about the spoons now. Yeah, it's a disaster. Okay, audio seems good. Nice. Some dude 64 asked, "How much do we know about animals aboard pirate ships? Were there ships, cats and dogs, or livestock kept on board?" A very interesting question. We actually know quite a lot about livestock on ships in this period due to archaeology and also written evidence. Of course, there's a lot of writings which describe animals aboard ships. Of course, you would bring a bunch of cattle on board: cows, goats, chicken, uh, pigs for fresh meat, and you would also have pets on board. So chicken, again, chicken are very cute. Also parrots, cats and dogs, as you said. Buccaneers, they had a lot of dogs, and they seem to have actually used dogs in combat on some occasions. Especially they use dogs when hunting. So yeah, thanks to archaeology and writing, animals were very common aboard ships. Of course, especially smaller pirate ships might have had less animals, but yeah, it's hard to make estimations without like writing. But in general, animals were quite common aboard ships in the period. Okay, so I'm gonna round off a bit. I'm gonna close down the stream at in like 5 minutes, but I'm gonna try to answer the last questions to the uh, best of my abilities. Andrew Ryan said, "You are trying to buy a gunpowder flintlock. I already have a gunpowder flintlock, and it's completely legal where I live, and it's also legal for me to shoot it. And you know, I also have firearms license. So." Pancake said, "You're Swedish, correct? How's the black powder firearm industry there?" There's a lot of antiques being sold. Um, you're also allowed to keep gunpowder if you don't have it in your residence. You can have it in like a storage or something, and it doesn't require a license. I do actually think buying gunpowder you need you need like a firearms license for it. And I mean, I do have a license, so I do have a hunting license, so it's not like no stress. Uh, Kit Simmons, matchlock no much good at sea, flintlock much better, and will even fire if slightly damp. Uh, it doesn't seem like matchlock, like the light match, was really too much of a trouble on sea. They don't seem to have a bit much of a problem. Mark Bouquet, what are you doing? Why are you spamming a bunch of letters? Okay, now you're deleting your messages. All right. Uh, Punzer's Ashes asked, "Black powder guns are legal in the U.S., right?" I don't know. I don't live in the U.S. Andrew Ryan said, "Thanks for that info. Should ask my Dutch friend this. Maybe it's easier there too uh, because apparently his Colt Bulldog replica not functioning could get him in trouble." Yeah, I don't know about the license in uh, I don't know about the license in the Netherlands. I was disturbed by Peter's question. Here's my question: what's the root? I think that's the root of 1720. Uh, I don't know. It's too late in the evening after like an entire. I went up at like I don't know 6:30, and I've pretty much been working since then. And I've had a live stream, so and I'm already not a math expert, so I'm not gonna answer it. Simple as. Mark Bouquet said, "I wanted to say thank you for answering my questions. I have to go. Lol, my keyboard screwed me over again." Yeah, many such cases. It's fine. I hope you enjoyed the stream, and I hope I was able to answer your questions to the best of my abilities. Kit Simmons says, "Just about any gun is legal in the U.S. apart from machine guns." Oh, that's really breaking the Constitution. It's not what the founding fathers intended. They wanted you to own machine guns and miniguns, like the heavy weapons guy. Black powder firearms are legal in the US. All right. Well, there doesn't seem to be any more questions, so I'm gonna close down the stream. I hope you guys enjoyed it. There's probably gonna be a few streams in December. I don't know when, if they're gonna be like after the premieres, but I will announce it in the video releases when the streams are gonna be. And we'll see if we can cook up something fun. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you later. Have a good evening, good day, wherever you are in the world.